Okay, in the last video for section 1, we're going to be talking about the configuration scheme of Jira and how to set up projects in regards to screens, workflows, permissions, and even notifications. We'll talk a little bit about that too. So we're going to learn about screens, we're going to learn about workflows, we're going to learn about permissions, and we're going to learn about notifications. First, let's take a look at screens. Okay, now we can flip over to Jira. And we're looking at our project view. So first thing we're going to do is select a project. And once we have our project loaded up here, we're going to go ahead and choose our settings for this project. So we'll come over here to the left-hand menu and select Settings. Now we saw a little bit about this in the previous video, but we're going to learn more deeply about screens. So let's talk about screens. Here you can see we use what's called a Scrum issue type screen scheme. Now, we've got a default screen scheme which will cover the different issue types: story, epic, task, and subtask. And then we've got a bug screen scheme which will cover the issue type bug. So if we take a look and we click this edit icon right here on the right, we can then drill in and we can take a look at default issue screen. Now this will give us control over all of the different fields that appear in an issue type. There may be some that you don't need to use because your organization doesn't use them or you don't find value in those, in which case removing them from the interface will make you faster, right? You don't need to have a view of those. The way you would do that, you can drag and move these into different orders. But let's say, for instance, we didn't want components. So we could easily just remove those. All right, now components will no longer appear on any of our issue types with the exception of bug, right? We haven't configured the bug one yet. You'll see down at the bottom here the ability to select the field. So we can actually select a field if we want to add something back, like components, right? Or we could even just start type components and add it back that way. And we'll drag it back up to right before the description where we had it before. Okay? So that's how you use screens in Jira. Next, let's take a look at workflows. So we can come here to workflows. Now, what the workflow is going to let you do is a workflow is going to allow you to see the different ways that a status can affect another status, right? And how items can move from one status to the next. So you can see how this works, right? So anything, any type can move to to-do. Once I create it, it automatically moves to to-do. Any type can move to done. Any type can move to in progress. Okay? Now, this is the diagram view. You can also see this in a text view here if you'd like to. If we go back here to workflows, we should be able to edit this item. This diagram is what we were just looking at a minute ago. And we can actually add a status here of closed. And now we have a new status, right? And then we can allow different transitions to happen to this closed status. One example that you might want to do would be, let's say if you have story points assigned to an item or maybe hours assigned to an item. When you move that through workflow and that item goes from in progress to done, when you move it to closed, you may want to have the remaining hours update itself to 0. So that's an example of something that you might want to do. Okay? That's workflows. Next, we'll take a look at permissions. All right, so jumping back into here. Now we want to take a look at permissions. So we'll bring up the permissions options for our default software scheme, which is what we're using for our Scrum project here. And you can see here, since I'm the only person that's actually accessing and controlling this, really, I have access to everything. But if I had more people that were assigned to this project, then I would be able to identify who can do what, both from a project permissions perspective as well as from an issue permissions perspective. Let's take a look at notifications as well. So you'll see under our first project, under notifications, we talked a little bit about this in the last section. But let's say you were the person who reported an issue. And when that issue was created, you would want the current assignee, the person that's assigned to that issue, to be notified. You'd also want any of the watchers of that item to be notified as well. You as the reporter would be notified. But then let's say that that issue go ahead and gets updated. Okay? So once that issue gets updated, it may be that you don't want to be notified of that. So we can edit the notifications and make it so that when an issue is updated, the reporter doesn't need to be notified. All right? So now the reporter would be notified when an item's created, but not when it's updated, but yes, again, when it's assigned. So we've reached the end of our first section. In this section, we talked about what Jira was. We talked about the history of Jira, what it's used for today, why you should use it. We talked about projects and how Jira organizes its work into a project format. We talked about how to create an account with Atlassian so we can start using Jira. We talked about creating and managing different projects in Jira, how to handle that. And then lastly, we talked more about the specifics in the configuration of projects like screens, workflows, permissions, and notifications. In our next section, we're going to talk about more detail in the managing of all of those work items. So you've got lots and lots to do, and Jira will help you to do that.